This is a Global Player original podcast.
Last time on Vine's 6 Seconds That Changed the World, Karen's jubilant rescue party ended on an ominous note.
At the end of the night, Marcus Johns came over to me and said, hey, everybody from 1600 Vine would like to meet with you.
It's a meeting that will shape the fate of Vine and the internet forever. It's a bright day in Los Angeles, California, in autumn 2015, and in a building just a stone's throw from the Hollywood Walk of Fame, a meeting is about to change the course of history. It's taking place in the conference room of an apartment block where a group of online creators live and make videos together. The address? 1600 Vine Street.
So I went over with a couple of other people from Vine the next day to have this meeting with them. And, it was like one of those kind of big, glossy apartment complexes that also had a conference room that the residents could use. And so we were in this apartment conference room, and it was like Jake Paul and Marcus Johns and, every kind of top Viner at the time. They were all the people who made those Vines at 1600 Vine every day.
Hey, what's up, man? How you doing? How's it going? Marcus Johns.
Marcus Johns, a Florida-born Vine star. He'd made it into the top 5 most followed people on Vine, becoming a classic 1600 creator, churning out an impressive volume of collaborative comedy skits. He built a big profile with brands and even worked as a social media correspondent covering the 2014 Oscars red carpet.
Angelina, Brad, adopt me, please! Please adopt me! I'm a good child!
These days, his vibe is a little different.
I just wanted to say that being a daddy is the best thing that anyone can have happen to them.
Now he posts about his wholesome family life on a farm in Nashville with his wife and kids, his riding of tractors. He has also diligently ignored every single attempt we have made to talk to him about this podcast. But look, the main thing you need to know is that at this point in our story, Marcus is the head of the 1600 group. Whether or not he would identify as such, he's basically become a union leader, and he shouldn't be underestimated. He's got the vision and the charisma to unite Vine's biggest creators into a negotiating unit. And this has never been done before. Of course, that also meant that it was all new to Karen and her team. Walking into the meeting room, they had very little idea what to expect.
We knew that we needed to just hear them out because there was several years of pain and frustration that had not been voiced.
You're in this sort of conference room, right? That's within the Vine Street complex, as you said.
Batch was the one who thought it would be clever to be a Viner and live on Vine Street, but it also was just kind of a coincidence that they lived at 1600 Vine, which was at the intersection of Hollywood Boulevard and Vine Street. There were some people who were not there. Logan Paul wasn't there. Jake Paul was there.
Okay.
King Batch was not there.
Oh,
King Batch has always kind of kept himself out of the gossip, out of anything that could be construed as controversial. He's just one of those I'm a nice guy and I want to surround myself with nice things sort of a personality. So he wasn't going to participate, but wanted to benefit from whatever it was they negotiated.
The fact that the 1600 group have succeeded in getting Vine management to come meet with them on their own turf is no small achievement when you consider that they're just a bunch of self-made creators, now dealing with a tech giant. The shiny conference room already makes it clear they want to be taken seriously as professionals, as grown-ups. Karen was leading the group on behalf of Vine, and of course Twitter, who were ultimately the ones in control and, perhaps more importantly, the ones who controlled the purse strings. It had already been made very clear to Karen that there were hard financial limits on any initiatives she wanted to bring in.
Twitter had said, here's your budget. You can do all kinds of things with Viners to encourage them to create Vines, but you can never pay them directly for content, because Twitter was worried that if we worked out any kind of deal to pay Viners to make Vines, that then they would also ask for the same deal to tweet. They didn't really understand that creators were always going to use Twitter as a marketing vehicle, and that they were very unlikely to ask for money in order to tweet. But it was a different thing. And I mean, we've seen now, my favorite statement is Vine walked so TikTok could run. So we've seen now that TikTok, of course, in early days had to pay a lot of creators to make content.
By this point, Karen has been in her role for just a few months, but she's become very familiar with the many frustrations creators have.
We just listened for quite some time to all of them talk about how unheard and unseen they had felt, which we all truly resonated with and understood, and I was quite committed to like making Vine a better place for them. At the same time, there was always a voice in all of our heads saying like, okay, we get it. You don't feel like truly supported by a platform, but at the same time, you guys all are making way more money than any of us are. Like you have used Vine as the platform by which you got famous and made a lot of income. So yeah, we get it. You feel sort of like emotionally scarred that you weren't being supported from the inside, but still, like, let's not negate the fact that you're quite successful because of this platform. We didn't say that in the room. Obviously, we didn't want to come across as combative. But we gave them a lot of opportunity to voice all of their distress. And we told them that we understood and that, we are not the people responsible for that distress. We are the new people, and we're really excited to create new things with them.
Unfortunately, the 1600 group was not interested in conversations about new creative opportunities. Airing their grievances may have had some therapeutic value, but first and foremost, their eyes were set on the financial prize, something which, unknown to the Vine team, had actually been in the works for months.
Yeah, I knew that it was going to happen. I had heard rumblings of what the amounts, what the figures were.
That's Brendan McNerney again, the mid-level creator who had ins with 1600 Vine. He'd segued into producing more experimental content, but still took a keen entrepreneurial interest in the evolution of Vine and was well connected in techie circles. With a unique insight into both sides of the equation, Brendan could see the writing on the wall early on.
At the time, I thought it was ridiculous, not from like a worth perspective, because I thought that the net worth and the sheer amount of views and metrics that you could deliver a brand from a marketing perspective, that number was warranted. But I also understood how unprofitable and like how big of a debt Vine collected as a company and an operation.
Brendan and other creators were interested in pushing Vine to make changes that would help with monetization, but they were considering different schemes, which to them seemed much more realistic.
There's got to be a middle ground of like, there's no creator funds in that day, and I still don't think creator funds are necessarily a good idea. I don't think they're equitable, but that should have been day one of creator fund, which is like, what if we paid everybody a small salary of $35,000 a year to create Vines, and then you get bonus incentives for working with our brand partners, bonus incentives for talking about Vine on Instagram. Like there was frameworks that I think we were even talking about as creators.
But while Brendan and others were still discussing potential monetization strategies, the 1600 group were going for gold.
And they of course they went to the table with like, give us the yacht.
And then the tone changed and it started to get kind of aggressive and ugly in the room. And there was some talk about how they all knew that if they ganged up and all decided to stop posting on Vine, like immediately, that the whole app would cease to exist. They knew that basically they wielded all of the power and all of the eyeballs and all of the audience, and that they could redirect that audience to Instagram and put us out of business quickly. And Marcus is quite smart. He was definitely in over his head. He cited a couple of things. He had Googled sort of like Twitter's revenue, and he was throwing around statistics talking about how essentially we could afford to pay them directly.
It's exactly what Karen has been trying to avoid.
So it's not ideal when you're in this new job and you've just had this party that you thought was a success the night before and you're excited, and like we were planning all these trips and all of these fun things to do, because my mandate was from Twitter, here's a pretty large budget. You can plan whatever you want to do with that budget to engage creators and make them post more Vines, because that was really the remit, right? It was like, let's get Viners to make more Vines. Instead, what was happening right then was a lot of the Viners were just posting Vines that said, follow me on Instagram. All my videos are now going to be on Instagram. They were just redirecting to Instagram because they were seeing so much growth with Instagram and they were seeing a decline in their numbers on Vine. And if they weren't getting the numbers that they wanted to on Vine, then they couldn't command the same brand partnership prices. So I get it. It was all a fallout from a need to continue to command high brand deals. But my job was to try and get them to make Vines on Vine, and not Vines or videos that they were then going to share on every other platform, but make a Vine using the Vine editing tools.
I need you to take in the insanity of this scene. A group of barely 20-something internet goofballs.
Disney Channel star Jake Paul is accused of making life miserable for his neighbors in fancy West Hollywood.
Pranksters who we've seen tase each other, make fart jokes, strip down in shopping malls, jump into strangers' trolleys, scream profanities, eat spaghetti with a drill, perk their pecs to the beat of a pop song.
We've done a lot of dumb things. It's the dumbest thing we've ever done.
Those guys were holding one of Twitter's biggest products for ransom, listing off their demands and threatening to pull the trigger if they aren't met. The 1600 group understood the power they held and the headaches they could cause. But in other ways, lacking any real industry knowledge, they seem to seriously misjudge the reality of the situation.
One of the things they really pointed to was the current YouTube marketing campaign that was out in the world. YouTube had picked like maybe 8 of their biggest YouTube stars, and they had subway wraps in New York with the creators' faces on them. They had huge billboards in Times Square, and they wanted that kind of marketing push behind them and their creator personalities. They wanted us to help them become even more famous than they were. And, you know, again, they just didn't understand that there was not at all a financial landscape to make any of that happen, or like a desire from anybody on the inside to make that happen.
They don't know about Karen's 3-tier rescue plan. To her, they are not the long-term future of the platform, but she still doesn't want them to kick up a fuss and frighten off users. They are the VIVs, the very important Viners, the bullet that can't be removed yet. She wants to keep them around just long enough that her cherished Ivy Leaguers and sprouts can grow big enough to knock them off their platform. It was, if I can take some dramatic license, like a polite, slow-motion coup.
But the thought that we were never going to be allowed to pay creators was obviously a huge obstacle, and one that we were facing in that meeting, because the conversation started to turn towards, okay, now we've told you everything that we're mad at you guys about. Now let's talk about how much money you're going to pay us. So Marcus said in the meeting, listen, we've figured out what we want from you guys. So we're going to post 3 Vines a week for the next year. And for that, we want $1 million.
$1 million. I mean, in the real world, well, in my world anyway, that's a lot of money. But in the world of big tech, it's barely a drop in the ocean. What's $1 million to Twitter? Was that all it was going to take? In a way, was this kind of a bargain? A one-off lump sum to stop all your creators complaining? To set your house in order? To buy Karen the time she needs to shepherd Vine into a new era?
My thought, and the thought of my coworkers who were at that meeting with me, was like, this is great. If they're all agreeing to post regularly for a year, then in that year, we can get this strategy off the ground and we'll have a ton of content ready to go. This is the time that we need. And so we left that meeting quite excited, because we felt like $1 million, you know, of course, we were going to have to convince Twitter that it was going to be okay to pay creators for content. But we felt really positive, like, guys, we can do this. It's $1 million. We'll go ask for it. And they had made us sign an NDA when we went into the meeting, which was hilarious because it was like immediately broken by all of them. But also, you know, how could I really sign an NDA and then go back and talk to a bunch of people at Twitter about the need for this money? The whole thing, you know, that is where, like, Marcus was smart, he was strategic, he was intelligent, but he was also just a kid, and he was trying to act as like a grown-up professional. And I give him all the credit in the world because he did a good job, but he just was like missing a few key elements. So, you know, we had to kind of disregard that NDA as well. And we went back to Twitter and we started strategizing about how to set up this meeting with Twitter leadership and kind of really, for the first time ever, like lay out the whole landscape, explain everything that was going on with Vine, and plead to them for this release of $1 million to pay these Viners to make Vines.
Karen and the team flew out of LA flustered but triumphant, with a deal that would be an easy sell to the big bosses. The end. I'm just joking. Imagine if that was the end of the story. Just picture me closing the cover of a big dusty storybook. The end. Oh, no, but of course, it was all too good to be true. You see, there was just one tiny detail that hadn't quite been communicated properly.
Was anything written down? Obviously, there's an NDA, but did they present you with like a little charter of requests or anything?
Well, they followed up with that via email the next week. Marcus emailed over the proposal. And what he had not said in the room was that the ask was for $1 million each.
Each. It wasn't $1 million. It was $1 million each. One small word that made all the difference.
They literally said, we will all make 3 vines a week for $1 million. And they just didn't say that word each in the room. So I was thinking, $1 million, I could do this. We could swing this. We thought, of course, we were stupid, but we thought that the ask was for $1 million for all of them. They each wanted $1 million for the year. So that was like a $19 million ask. And I got on the phone with him and said, like, buddy, I don't think you understand. Like, Vine has never made a penny. So there is no way I could ever get $19 million unlocked for you guys. There's no way in hell. And he was like, I know how much Twitter makes. And I was like, yeah, but this isn't Twitter. This is Vine. We're nascent. We have never monetized. I don't think you really understand what it is that you're asking. And then as we were talking, Gabby Hanna texted me and said, Lele Pons told me what's going on. And even though I'm not a 1600 Viner, if I don't get $1 million, I'm also not going to post. And so Lele had gone and told a whole bunch of people, how excited she was that she was about to get Vine to pay her. And then the ripple effect just began, and I started getting text after text from all kinds of creators saying, you have to make the same deal with us. So then we just knew there was no way this was ever going to happen.
Yeah, so much for that NDA. Once other creators started hearing about Vine potentially paying $1 million for content, it became a free-for-all, setting a precedent Twitter had hardline avoided for years. There was no way they'd agree to a payout now that the word had got out. If there had been a chance for a turnaround, there definitely wasn't one anymore.
So we told Marcus that it wasn't going to happen. All of those 1,600 Viners started just immediately making Vines saying, we're leaving Vine, follow us on Instagram. All of our content is there.
So, no deal. And true to their word, the 1,600 Viners headed straight for the door. But they weren't bluffing this time. They were gone. For Rich Arnold, head of design, it felt like Vine was finally reaping what they had sown.
I remember my reaction to hearing at the time was like, brother, we don't make no money. Like, where are we going to get $1 million for you from? Like, we don't sell ads. But, it's a symptom of you created this culture where you empowered 100 people to be the lifeline to the entire product. And then, like, when those people decide to use their leverage, you're in deep shit. Sorry, like that's your problem. Like you hitched this entire thing on, 20, 21-year-olds who at any point could just decide, like, actually, like, we're not getting paid for this. We can go anywhere else and like their audience will come. And they were right,
I think it would be easy at this point to be like, oh, boo-hoo, these rich 20-year-olds didn't get their $1 million or whatever. But everyone has a different perspective on it. But when you look in subsequent years, how much money platforms like YouTube or now TikTok are more than happy to pay creators. Obviously, those are platforms that are much more successfully monetized with ads, which is one of Vine's various failings. Mr. Beast or any of these huge creators make a lot of money, and platforms are willing to give them money because they value what they create. Is it that crazy what they were asking for?
I mean, this is the thing, is that the sticking point was Vine didn't have the resources available.
Yeah.
But the question of whether what they were producing had the value that they were assigning to it is a different question. And yeah, it sounds ridiculous, but actually, I mean, according to Brendan, maybe they were kind of spot on with their calculations.
I mean, like, just using like a CPM calculator right now. If
CPM, if you've forgotten, is how much money brands would be willing to pay a creator based on how well their videos perform.
Like somebody that's driving you maybe 500,000 views on a singular video, that's a $12,500 video. And you're looking at creators that are generating 12.5K in potential impressions per video. They're uploading it 3 times a week. They're doing that for 4 weeks during the year. You're already looking at about $150,000 a month in like just a standard CPM on impressions. that run rate's over $1 million a year. Like that's like $1.5 million, and they're asking for $1 million for their existence on the platform. So to not think that from a Vine perspective, you can squeeze that out of them, if you can squeeze profitability out of paying them $1 million, is like, just at the time, if the industry wasn't there, I just don't think the foresight was there to say, yeah, these people are worth $1 million. I think the audiences were well worth $1 million, and they just didn't click that. I don't think they had that perspective.
I cannot emphasize enough how consequential this was in so many ways. It would have been one thing if the 1600 Vine negotiations had just quietly failed, but word getting out that they'd happened in the first place arguably was even more detrimental. The creator relationships that Karen had been carefully nurturing for months were destroyed in a matter of days.
The true conversation that was happening was like, everybody sub that tier was fucking pissed. We were like, why them? Like, they don't push the bounds creatively. At least at that point, that wasn't their MO. It was, videos that are still memed today, but like, it was stuff that, we're like, oh, really? Like, that's your idea? Like, the idea that some other smaller Viner had 6 months ago with like a slightly different twist. I think everybody was just pissed. We were like, the immediate aftermath was like the fact that meeting even took place. It just felt like this weird Succession style summit, like, it's like the evil geniuses getting together and like, controlling as Illuminati. It just felt weird, and we were just kind of like, yeah, this is the ecosystem that we live in, where everybody else is like getting together and throwing Vine parties. And my entire group of friends in LA at one point was like 25 people deep. Everybody was a Viner, and like it was just like that. You're like, yo, this is the community you're ignoring versus those people who like talk shit on each other left and right and have beef in the comment sections. Like, come on. So yeah, I think it was just disappointment and frustration from a lot of people after that meeting took place.
Most of the creators I've spoken to from around that time say that even if they respected the sheer savviness of the 1600 group in monopolizing the platform, their overwhelming presence was still damaging to the Vineverse and to Vine content overall. Here's Manon Matthews.
Although I knew and I'd met up with a lot of those Viners, that wasn't my, we called ourselves like the indie group. Even though we weren't indie, like we still all had millions of followers. We weren't quite at the tens of 20s of millions of followers. And so we were continuing, my group was continuing to make content and enjoy the app and have fun. But we weren't aware that these conversations were happening. And so it would have been nice to kind of know about it so that I could take my 3 million followers and be like, hey, following on YouTube and Instagram, and like, let's keep this good thing going. It was kind of abrupt and weird, and like, why are they doing this? This seems a bit entitled. I remember thinking, sure, yeah, I guess we should be getting paid, but also remember, before this app existed, you weren't doing anything. So like, where's the gratitude? Of course, we should be compensated for our efforts. If we weren't creating, then people wouldn't care about the app, and the app would have just not really done well. I always see both sides. I'm a Libra, so I see both sides. Like, I'm just grateful that this app exists, so I'm going to give it what it's given me. And so to think that, 20 people were like, we want this amount of money, and if we're not paying this, then we are leaving. It's like, could you have demanded less money? Maybe? I don't know. Like, can you ask for like $100,000 each? Like, why are you all each asking for $1 million? Like, calm down. Half of those people didn't realize what they were doing. They're not on Vine anymore, and they're not making any money. So like, I don't even think that all 20 of those people were thinking, oh, what could happen if this app goes away? I think they were just like, their ego got so inflated, and then they just assumed that they'd be taken care of with these other apps, and they lost so many followers, and they're not as successful as they were on Vine.
There's definitely an ecosystem. Everyone needs everybody and everything to keep that app running.
Jasmeet Rayner, he's the creator we met back in episode 4 who found success, often from taking the piss out of popular Vine trends.
When the popular people, I guess, pulled back and jumped ship, like when I'm making those parody Vines or I'm like making fun of trends, like that's not really there anymore because those guys are gone. So then you're like making other Vines or whatever. So it's like there's definitely an ecosystem. And so the Vine started diminishing and started being less of what it was.
And that deterioration was very real. Brandon Kevyah, one of Vine's very first creators, had built a serious following for his comedy skits long before cliques, collaborations, and Revine for Revine became the norm. He'd seen Vine through every era, and he remembers when it was clear that the end was nigh.
I would go to the popular page
and I would see the biggest videos of the day only get like 5,000 likes in like 3 hours, which is a lot of people. But when you compare it to the peak of Vine, I'd say this is like 2014, 2015. The number one on the popular page would get like 100,000 likes in like an hour. It was crazy. So when you see that, you go, oh, this thing's on the way out. You prepare for it. I prepared for it. I think I just kind of knew. I was like, this is not going to last long. It's very fun, but it's like college, you know? It doesn't last. You make experiences there and you cherish those, but then you move on. You get a job somewhere else, you know, at a firm.
Kenny Knox, part of the newer generation of creators, was a big beneficiary of Karen's schemes.
When did you first get a sense of like Vine's kind of on the way out?
Oh, when my page was more active at like 500, 600K than when I had like 1.45 million followers. I was like, what's going on here? I literally had the last viral video on Vine.
Wow.
And you want to know how many likes it peaked at?
What was it?
It peaked at 81,000 likes. That's how much activity was lost on Vine. And I literally had to dig in the back of my brain and go to the back of my neck to try to go viral on Vine. But we all had to post to keep the app alive. Everybody damn near left. I was one of the last people who stayed. So it's only me and Thomas Sanders going head to head on the comedy page literally every single day. Because I was literally fighting for Vine's life at the end of his life. Everybody left. I stayed. I'm like, no, bro, I'm staying. Karen, I got you. I ain't going nowhere. Because you can tell it was kind of getting to her a little bit that people were quitting. And she showed so much love and putting money in people's pockets. And she's like, why are you promoting Instagram on here? Like, I've already featured you on the app. And I could tell it was starting to stress her out a little bit.
Bit of an understatement. Karen was going to fight to the bitter end. Vine was still breathing even after the failed meeting and the mass walkout. It wasn't dead yet, and if a spark of creativity had rapidly made it one of the most downloaded apps in the world when it started, why couldn't it happen again? Back in New York, Karen cut her losses and was turbocharging the 2 remaining tiers, going full throttle on the new generation of creators who'd stuck by the app.
We had to really accelerate the Ivy League plan. We took them to Japan. We took them to England. We took them on all these content creation trips. We took them to the White House. We made Vines with Michelle Obama, which was truly an amazing event. King Batch was actually with us for that, and he got Justin Bieber to give him an unreleased track. So, you know, there were little sparks and high points after that meeting that made us feel like we were still going to survive and we were still going to make it.
Interestingly, a lot of the Sprout creators that Karen and her team had identified as major talents are the same people who have gone on to be the most famous post-Vine.
Our sort of last hurrah, it was when we were desperately trying to do anything to compete with other platforms and stay alive. And we made this series called Camp Unplug that, when you look back on it, most of the cast of that long-form series is quite famous now and doing very well for themselves.
I watched it at the time, but I was watching it now and I was like, oh, it's Cody Ko. Everyone's in this. It's crazy.
Yeah. So those, I mean, I will say, like, big pats on the back for myself and the content team, because we had identified, like, these are all the next generation of successful creators. We just didn't have that, like, really, I think we needed about 6 months for that tipping point to occur for them to be dominating the app. And we just didn't have that time.
March 2016. As the first buds of spring begin to emerge in Central Park, power is shifting at Vine HQ.
Little did we know, we had also just been given a new general manager, someone external who came in. And I think the story goes that, like, from the second she was hired, she was told, you know, like, hey, we're going to shut this app down and we're bringing you on to, like, shut it down as gracefully as possible or something. But we saw her as a huge enemy, and, you know, everything was just literally falling apart around us.
Rich Arnold recalls Team Vine being taken out for an away day with the new general manager.
Jason Toft, the GM, left. We had an interim GM for a moment, and then we brought in the last person who was GM, this woman named Hannah. And I remember we did this, like, offsite
And part of it was some stupid exercise where it was like, you write down your fears about the product, and then we're going to put them up on the wall, and then we'll let them go, whatever. I don't think I even did it, honestly, but a friend of mine, what she wrote was it's too late. You blew it, basically. That's what happened.
That's the most Silicon Valley thing I've ever heard of. Everyone write down your feelings.
I know. It's interesting because I don't think she was from Silicon Valley. I think she was from New York, but it was that's the thing that we don't do here. You know, I mean, even today, culturally, there's a very big difference between New York tech and California tech, and this is one of those things that I would categorize as California bullshit.
Yeah, that's wild. Do you remember exactly when you found out that they were shutting Vine down? Do you remember where you were, how you found out?
Oh, big time! I still have the email because it was so insane. So I knew something was happening. I assumed that they were going to do layoffs, actually. I didn't assume they were going to shut it down. I assumed that there was going to be a pretty big layoff, and then maybe they would fold it into Twitter or something like that. And it was to the degree that I was pretty confident it was going to happen. I was already I was planning to leave. I was ready to, I was already halfway out the door. And it's funny, literally the night before they did layoffs, I was looking to find the GM, because I was going to tell her, if we could just be above board for a minute, I'm not sticking around. So if there's layoffs, one of the other guys on the team, he wants to stay. You should keep him and you should let me go because I'm not sticking around. But I couldn't find her. And so then the next morning we had an email. It was Hannah used to do these this is very common. GMs or heads of company do their weekly top of mind thing, whatever. And her thing was called the Tiger Times. Something about her, it was part of her brand, calling herself the Tiger or something like that. I don't really remember why. But it was hey dudes, got a really important meeting tomorrow morning, so it'd be super cool if you guys could be in the office tomorrow. And when I saw that, I knew that meant okay, we're all this shit was going down. But it was such a bizarre this weirdly excited way to be hey gang, you're all about to get shit canned. And so then we showed up to the office the next morning. She did some announcement that they were basically shutting down the app, and that a handful of people would be asked to stick around for 3 months to sunset it, basically. And then we all did one-on-one conversations with her and HR or whatever. And then
man, that email you described is absolutely insane.
I want to take a pause for a moment because Mary, apparently you have got hold of this email.
Yeah. Rich has sent it. It is as he remembers, and we've checked with another employee because we want to be sure, and they agree that this is what they sent.
It's been verified as real.
And I've sent it to you now. I mean, I've got to say, it's a little bit of comic lightness in the darkness of the end of Vine, but let's just bear in mind context. You are a major organisation, the sort of worst situation a company can be in, where you realise you are no longer surviving, and that means that all these people who depend on you for their livelihood, and this is you inviting them to the meeting where you are very sadly going to tell them that despite all of your best efforts, you can no longer employ them. And I'm sending it to you now because
yes, you've been keeping this from me strategically so I could read it live.
It is quite remarkable.
Okay, this is genuinely my first time seeing this email. I'm going to read it out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, today's headline: Team Huddle tomorrow. Feels pretty light so far.
Yeah, a huddle.
Hey dudes, we're going to do a midweek huddle tomorrow at 11 a.m. It doesn't even say meeting, it's just huddle.
Oh yeah.
If you're remote, or OOO, which I guess is out of office,
yeah,
would be rad. Rad!
Yeah, that's the bit that gets me.
It would be rad if you could VC in, and I'm guessing VC is video call or video chat.
Must be.
Why? They couldn't type out of office? Brackets, if you don't have access to Hangouts, hit me back, and I can dial you in because G-Hang is the best like that. Thanks. Thanks with a full stop as well.
Oh yeah.
Thanks.
The most solemn moment of the entire message is the full stop after thanks.
It's not, by the way, this is mandatory attendance because you need to find out. We're letting you all go. It's if you're working remotely, it'd be rad if you could call in because if you don't call in, it'll be less rad for you because you won't find out that you have lost your job. It's very cash, isn't it? I just think when you receive this email, you could be easily forgiven for not realising that you're being summoned to the end.
Yeah, I would think, no, I can miss that.
Slightly tone deaf, I would say, most charitably.
I did reach out to her. She did reply. She was the GM at the time. She said, sorry, I'm not doing these types of requests, which is fair enough.
She had a pretty poison chalice. I'm not saying she's a bad person for doing this or anything like that.
It's kind of beautiful in its inappropriateness. It's just cringy.
Like, I thought it was more funny than anything. Like, oh, this is wild. I had already started talking to Instagram at this point, so I knew I was out. So I wasn't angry or anything. You know, the thing was already over. I should say, like, I do, like, actually kind of have some sympathy. I think she was put in a really difficult position. I don't think she did a particularly good job at the role, but I don't know if there's a good way to do it. We all left. We went to this bar around the corner, like this like shitty Chelsea, New York bar. It was like not a cool place. So we went there probably at like 11 in the morning, you know, noon maybe or something like that. And it was just 2 or 3 like regulars. And then all of a sudden, you know, like 40 people walk in. And we're all like hanging out, getting drinks and stuff. And there's like a TV on. And then while we're there hanging out, the TV announces
Twitter is shutting the 6-second video service today. But
that like the news is on, and they're like, oh, Twitter's shutting down Vine. And of course, like the bar is like, "What? We're gonna, yeah, this is us," you know. But it's like the super like surreal moment of like, I'm sure the people who were there were like, "Oh, I guess this is them," you know. We were like, "Yeah."
Twitter, and you'll post it directly to Twitter.
Do you remember the day when they turned it off? You know, how
oh yeah,
to you?
Absolutely. I was on vacation. I was in Albuquerque at my in-laws' house, and my boss said to me, "I know you're on vacation, but this meeting is mandatory." So there was like 3 hours of my father-in-law figuring out what the Wi-Fi password was for me to join the meeting. And then I think it was the general manager at the time, Hannah, who said, you know, so we're going to close, and effective today, most of you will go home and be given a severance. But some of you will receive an email. And for those of you who do, you're not going to, this won't be your last day. You've been chosen to be part of the shutdown team. So I was one of those lucky people. So I went out and got really drunk in Albuquerque, and then kind of dealt with the fact that while many of my coworkers had a 3-month severance that they got to sit at home and enjoy and look for jobs, I was one of the, I think maybe there were 12 of us, given the task of closing the company. So for the next 3 months, I worked out my severance by packaging up all of the Vine merch that my coworker Jeremy and I had created, which was a huge success, by the way. Still to this day, Vine merch is a very valuable item on the internet. And I packed up everything that was left and sent it out to all of the creators who were reaching out and asking for it, and, you know, wrote a lot of teary letters and tried to be the supportive cheerleading mom that I always had been.
Karen, Vine's chief optimism officer, had lost her battle. Her vision for the app, courting creators, curating content first, was too far ahead of its time.
I think Vine could have survived with the support of Twitter. If Twitter had any fluency around Vine, then they could have brought their own ideas to the table and really participated in a conversation about what the future roadmap looked like. It just comes down to timing and leadership and the support from Twitter as well. You know, like if every decision maker at Twitter was a regular Vine user, then I think we would have had a lot more internal support. But the story goes that Jack Dorsey was friends with the founders. And then when the whole thing fell apart, you know, he kind of lost heart for it. If anybody with any kind of foresight had just said, wait, maybe the problem here is that there's a bunch of people there with very little experience trying to figure things out with no mandate or no roadmap. So like, let's just put a couple of quite experienced people on this and let's give them one more year to turn it around. Because I really think if we had had good leadership and we had had one more year, we could now be TikTok, and Congress wouldn't be worried about the fact that our social media success is governed by China now. I want to say we had 1 million daily active users when we closed, which, I mean, hey, a ton of apps would kill for that kind of traffic, right? But it seemed clear to Jack and the other Twitter leadership that the peak had come and gone, and we were no longer growing, we were deteriorating. And like, rather than just get to embarrassingly low levels, let's just kill it while it's still kicking.
What's up, Internet? My name is Logan Paul, and I am reporting live from Vine Street. Today we are going around asking some of Vine's biggest creators how they feel about their platform being killed off like a chicken at McDonald's. Let's go!
And just like that, Vine was dead. Not with a bang, but with an email.
There we go. Vine's dead.
That's it.
Vine's done. But you know what's not done? This story. We've got some more to dig into, Mary. And a few more people we need to talk to.
Does it feel anticlimactic?
In a way, without being too cheesy, Vine dying is almost the beginning of the story. All the way back in episode 1, I promised that if you want to understand TikTok and the tech world of today, you need to understand the story of Vine.
You did promise that.
I did promise that, and I like to keep my promises.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the point in this upcoming final episode. This is the point where we will make that connection between how this little 6-second app got us to the world that we're in now.
On the final episode, the autopsy, the funeral, and the lasting legacy of Vine.
It was this changing of the guard moment on the internet. They experienced so much hate.
You let Vine die in front of you.
And I was like still tight with like a couple of the guys who were like some of the back-end engineers there. And so I messaged them and I was like, is it possible I could like squeeze in one last Vine before you shut down?
You can listen to Vine's 6 Seconds That Changed the World on Global Player. Download it from the App Store or go to globalplayer.com. Vine 6 Seconds That Changed the World is a global original podcast, created and hosted by me, Benedict Townsend, and produced by my co-creator, Mary Goodhart. Narrative and creative by producer Kevyah Cardoso, score and sound design by Patrick Lee, and mixed by Chris James. Sophie Snelling is the executive producer, Al Riddell is head of Factual podcasts, and Vicky Etchells is director of podcasts at Global.
This is a Global Player original podcast.